Yo, today's April 5th, Wednesday, 5:30 Pacific time. And if you're listening to this, hopefully you're looking at the picture that I posted with this. My name is Aaron Capista. I'm Cappy of Cappy's Cage in Las Vegas, Nevada, and I'm a former professional baseball player. Now I'm a trainer, teacher, mentor, try to help people, especially baseball players, especially position players and hitters, with everything from athletic training to skill development. Now, the picture I'm posting with this, I don't know if this is going to be part of my podcast or whatever, but I had to get it out. I think it's important because I want to help Heyward. Okay? I'm originally from Chicagoland and, grew up a Cubs fan, all that stuff, and certainly follow not only the MLB season and its players, but pretty closely the Chicago Cubs. So if you know the Cubs and you know Jason Heyward, you know he's struggling mightily and he needs help. And I'm going to see if this can get to him sooner than later, because I know it's not easy where he's at with his career, and the only way it's going to change if he helps himself. And I don't know Jason, but on a smaller scale, I've certainly been where he's at as a player. And it's a terrible feeling. What happens is you're getting bombarded with people trying to change, tweak, fix, in this case, pretty much everything. I'm not going to get too much into the mental part. As we know, people that are close to the game know that hitting especially is very mental. But there's some pretty obvious physical components of his swing and the mechanics that for whatever reason over the last year and a half have not been addressed. Maybe they have. They certainly haven't been executed by Jason. And I think that's the important message, is going back to him helping himself. He's going to have to execute some of these things. So if we're looking at the picture associated with this broadcast, it's a split screen of the game. It was yesterday. Same at bat. And it's the same pitch. It's Adam Wainwright versus Heyward. The result was a rollover chopper to second base, which Jason's been pretty much known for over the last 600 at bats or so, plus spring training. He's got a vicious habit of rolling over on fastballs, any pitches in general, and that's kind of the result he's getting. I always like to talk to hitters and ask them, how are you getting out? How are you getting out? And I think the first thing that would come to mind with Heyward is, a weak ground ball to the right side, which is the rollover. Hitters don't like that word. So he's getting a dose of that. And it almost seems like the more he, obviously he's aware of this, and the more he's thinking about not doing it, the more he's doing it. He's repeating what he doesn't want to because of the bad habits, the unwillingness to execute anything different other than that outcome, really. So the number one thing that I've always it stuck out to me with Heyward is he's so flat-footed in the box, and you see that on the left. That's flat-footedness. The weights looks to be distributed like either really evenly flat-footed or almost. You'll see in live video when you really watch, he literally digs his heels into the ground. It's a habit. It's a whatever you want to call it, something superstitious in his mind that he feels like he has to do, but it's a very bad habit. Whereas I would love to see him get more athletic and put the weight more on the balls of his feet. As we know, that's an athletic position. And what we're trying to execute here is a better swing off, the world's best pitchers competition. It will benefit you to be in the most athletic position you can possibly get yourself in. Now, I've heard people say like they can't even they don't even know how Heyward actually even makes contact, and because he's in such a funk right now, physically and mentally, that when he does square it up and hit the ball, people will almost joke about, you don't even know how he puts the ball in play. And my response to that is, Jason Heyward's one of the greatest athletes on planet Earth right now. Okay? He's not producing right now. He's not hitting. But athletically, that's his thing. Okay? Forget about being one of the better baseball players in the world. He's for sure, one of the top 1% of athletes on planet Earth in all sports. He's 6'5", 230, 240 pounds, hands work, feet work, super freakishly athletic. So my number one point with him is get more on the balls of your feet. Get in a position you can, not only execute your stride and fire your hands and hips and maintain balance and body control throughout that process. I mean, that, because as we get a little further on in the conversation, you see that's where he really struggles with. There's no balance and body control throughout stance, swing, follow through, and finish. And that's because he gets in this bad flat-footed position that you see on the stance on the left, and then it all kind of goes wrong when you look at the picture on the right. So, number one, shift the weight more on the balls of your feet. I think even mentally you're going to feel a little more secure about yourself in the way you manage your overall balance and body control. And if I had a little video of his whole setup in his stance going into his stride, you would see some really goofy movements with his heel, his front heel, his stride foot heel, and then he kind of rocks inwards a little bit and puts all his weight still flat-footed, but on the inner side of his front foot. It's a very awkward looking movement. And I understand, hitters have these little quirky little movements that they do. It's something that puts them in a comfort zone. It's a habit. It's maybe a superstition, whatever the case is. And generally those movements don't affect negatively a hitter's performance. But in this case, it affects the foundation, the root of something a hitter needs, and that's balance and body control. Okay, so we see a lot of hitters do some quirky, weird things, but generally it's just a movement that we could give or take. It's not affecting their execution of a good swing. In this case, his weight distribution on his feet, in my opinion, is terrible, and it's setting him up for a disadvantage before the pitch is even thrown. Okay, so number two. He makes himself smaller than he makes himself a lot smaller than the athlete he is. Okay, I always tell hitters, don't make yourself smaller than you already are. Okay, we want to be able to use our reach, use our leverage, and apply that to how our body moves and executes a good swing on time. So with Jason, he's 6'5" on the pitcher on the left, and for the next few minutes, use those letterings behind the umpire, Busch Stadium. Okay, they were playing in St. Louis, Busch Stadium, going across the background. Use that as a reference to see where his head is, and you'll see what I'm talking about here when I talk about not only does he make himself substantially smaller, but his head movement is brutal. It's all over the place. We're talking like we're talking like 2 feet over and 1 foot down. There's all this movement in the head while he's trying to execute, hitting Adam Wainwright fastballs and curveballs, which is hard enough as it is. But here we're taking an unathletic positioned athlete, and then now we're moving his head pretty much all over the place. And why that's not good for a hitter is because our vision is in our head, our eyes. So using that reference in the background, that Busch Stadium, you see the letter Busch. On the left, the letter B, how he's basically covering that. He's probably 3-4 inches even above that line. And then on the right, what you see is really just a terrible position of what I call the striking position, which would be the front stride foot down and the hands back. It's a very important position for a hitter to get into after his load, creating a little momentum. And then you want to be in a real comfortable position to strike. And by striking is, your hands and your hips is really going to generate that bat speed. So on the right, you see his head has come over several feet, and he's getting this flex in his knees where he's actually lowering himself substantially. Okay? So Jason Heyward goes from 6'5" to in his stance with a little bit of flex in his knees on the left there, say 6 foot, to on the right after stride, ready to strike. He's hitting from, this is just a guess, but he's probably 5 feet now. He's probably like 5'5" maybe. He's somewhere in that. I'd be willing to say he's a foot shorter than he is standing straight upright. Well, if anybody's played baseball before or hit, just try that, It's like basically someone telling you to get in the worst position possible and then try to hit a 95-mile-an-hour fastball with movement. So, to summarize these first 2 points that I'm bringing up is he's putting himself in a terrible position to execute and allow his hand-eye coordination and his hips and his body to execute a good swing. So he's putting himself in terrible position. He's starting at a disadvantage, and by the time he gets to that point on the right of that pitcher where he's trying to start his swing, again, he's in a terrible position. Don't make yourself smaller than you already are. At 6'5", he creates all kind of good things when it comes to reach and leverage. If he stands probably a little further off the plate than normal, but when you have the length in his arms, he can effectively cover that outer half without reaching, leaning, lunging. So I think that's a big point there is there's too much head movement, and he's lowering himself. Even this pitch right here, which was the ground out roll over to second, this was a strike. This wasn't some pitch he was, leaning, lunging, reaching for that was ankle high. I mean, this was a knee high fastball. If anything, it might have been a little away, but it was a strike. It was a hittable pitch. And you see him in a terribly short position. So not only is his head moving, where his vision's being skewed, and he's making it harder on himself to hit, but his body just won't work well when it's only 5 feet off the ground, and you're packing, a 6'5", phenomenal athlete into that position and trying to tell him to launch his hands. It's just not going to happen. So the third point is his stride foot landing spot. Okay, so Jason starts with a little bit open stance, like a half foot open stance, which is very common. There's nothing wrong with that. I always say it's where you land, it's not where you start. So what you see from this angle, from the left side to the right side, is when he takes that stride, he dives in. He's diving in probably 8-9 inches, if not more, 10 inches from where he starts. And then the problem with that is he's crossing that line. He wants to be in line when he lands with his back toe. So that way his hips are still squared, and now his hips are going to work for him. He's going to get the most out of his hips when his toes, when that front foot, stride foot would land even with his the toes even, back foot, front foot, if that makes sense. Sorry, I kind of mumbled that, but yeah, you want to land in line there. You don't want to land. What you see on the right is him severely blocking off his hips. He's cutting himself off. And then what he's been doing for the last year and a half is swinging basically all arms, all hands, because his lower half won't work for him. He's tying himself up. And there's a reason why average fastballs are beating him almost all the time. You know, that's the knock on him right now is he's not hitting fastballs. And you know, as a hitter, if you're not hitting fastballs, that's not good. So front foot landing spot. Now, I'd almost recommend to scoot up a little more on the plate because psychologically he wants to dive in to reach that outside corner. That's why he does it. It's a bad habit. You know, with the video that he's got now, and you've got to know that someone's got, and I'm assuming here someone's told him that if, and therefore again, I'm holding him accountable for having to execute this. He's the one that has to stride straight ahead and land squared in line, toe to toe, so his hips are squared and his hips can function the way a hitter's hips are supposed to. Okay, but instead he's diving in and then he's just cutting across severely with his hands and his body rotation, and that's what's causing the rollovers. His hands aren't in a position to work because his stride foot and his hips aren't allowing the hands to work. I always say put your body in best position to allow your hands and hips to create the most damage. So he's at a severe handicap when he's even starting this process by his front foot landing spot diving in towards home plate rather than landing in a square position. So like I said, a lot of times hitters do that because it's just a psychological thing for them to think they have to do that to dive to reach the outer half. But you don't. And if that's what you believe, then you got to scoot up on the plate a little bit. And then psychologically you're going to want to stride straight ahead because you're not going to feel the sense or urgency to have to dive in on fastballs away, sinkers away, whatever, anything running away. So that's the third point. And then really that's my main points. I don't want to go on and probably what Jason's been hearing a lot is, 50 different things from 50 different people. Hopefully that was fairly easily explained on my part, bringing up some major points. The big thing that every person that follows baseball, the Cubs or Jason Heyward is, the big difference in his hand position and his stance. And really, to me, that's irrelevant. If anything, I think that's going to backfire and work negatively because clearly that's not a natural position for him to be in. Someone brought that up to him, for the sake of changing something. And he's, talk about an unnatural position. I've never seen him with hands in a setup like that. So I don't see a lot of positive coming from that because as you see in the picture from left screenshot to right screenshot, the hands just trigger back into that very close to his back ear, to his head position where he likes to throw his hands from. So again, we're talking about a hitter struggling to hit fastballs. Why make him move his hands 2 feet, throughout the course of the approach? I mean, I'd say if anything, you need to cut down big movements rather than create another big movement. So, the hand thing is a tricky one because, I don't believe that that's where Jason Heyward wants to start his hands. I think that's what was suggested to him for the sake of making a change. Otherwise, that would have been something very normal for him to do. at any point in his life. I doubt if he ever started from that point. So I don't think that works good on the mind mentally, because somewhere along the line he's probably up there saying, this isn't me. And it's creating a longer movement to where he throws his hands from anyway. And that's what you see on the right side. And that's what you've seen his whole career, is he quickly brings those hands right back to the ear anyway. So it's not freeing him up any different motions or anything. It's not creating some different load or anything. He's going back to home anyways. Home base, meaning where his comfort zone is. So to me, that's just a poor effort to create some sort of change. Really what we talked about, and this is why I'm doing this, is because I think it's an easier fix than everybody set out, to tinker and toy with him. Get more athletic, get on the balls of your feet. Don't make yourself smaller. Don't feel the need to bend so much and go from 6'5" great athlete to bad position 5'5" guy trying to throw his hands at a pitch. The stride foot, you're diving in, you're blocking your hips off. Nothing works from that point. So hopefully I will, some of this would help him. I'm sincerely doing this in the hopes that, it could maybe he could hear this and change perspective, change his point of view. I know it's terribly difficult, to execute what he's trying to do. Unfortunately, he's a player who makes $28 million a year, and he still has 7 years remaining on his contract with a guaranteed $162 million. So it's got to the point where in a city like Chicago, I feel for the guy. I want to help him. And if this gets to him, great. Far too often, a lot of guys at that level get into a bubble where no one enters into their bubble, and they've got their hitting coach from high school, and they've got, the couple hitting coaches in the organization, and not to say those guys aren't good, because obviously they are very good, but I've always kind of joked in this case that, what are the sheer odds of it that the best guy in the world to help you through a tough time is actually employed by, the same company that you are, that he's sitting right next to you. I mean, just the sheer odds of that aren't very good for Jason. So not to say they're not good at what they do, but, clearly it's not reaching him in a manner where he's following up and making the necessary changes, tweaks, So that's why I'm doing it. Hopefully it helps. And any questions or comments, feel free to leave. And if you want to share this or pass this around as a Cubs fan, great. I'm just here to help. I know this dude gets a lot of shit, and it's not fun to be him when you're struggling this bad. And based on spring training in the first couple of games this year, I don't see this ending well unless he can start executing some of these things more simply and more effective to ultimately allow his overall athleticism to take over. That's kind of what you want to do with a 6'5" freak athlete is let his athleticism take over, and he's just doing the opposite. He's putting himself in very bad positions to strike. So that's all I got. Hope you like it. Leave question, comments if you have so. If you want to follow some of my other stuff, feel free. And good luck, Jason Heyward. I mean it.